Hi, my name is Paige Cook, and today for my senior project, I'm going to be teaching you all how to make macarons. Now first off, the ingredients. Now these are the ingredients you're going to need. So next, we're going to get into making the meringue.
So when making your meringue, you're going to want to beat your egg whites until they're frothy. Now, I tend to beat my egg whites at a speed of 4 to 6, around medium. And once they're frothy, you're going to add your cream of tartar and your salt. So I'm going to let these beat for a bit because it does take a while, and I'll be back. So now that my eggs have gotten frothy and bubbly, I can put in my cream of tartar and I can put in my salt. Now, after I put in my salt and my cream of tartar, I continue to let those beat at a medium speed until I start seeing streaks in the egg whites. After that point, I put in the sugar. So now that I have streaks in my whites, I'm going to add my sugar. I do so 1 tablespoon at a time. The reason I do this is because if you put all your sugar in at once, you're going to collapse your meringue and ruin it. Also, I use caster sugar instead of granulated sugar because caster sugar is more fine and it dissolves better into the egg whites, and overall it creates a better meringue. Now, I'm going to move on to adding the color and the flavor and give you some tips about that. Now I'm putting in yellow gel food coloring and pineapple flavoring. My flavoring is liquid, which is not recommended, but my flavoring is highly concentrated and it's alcohol based. It only needs a couple drops to get the flavor. So, I found that it works excellently and it's never ruined my macarons. Now that I've got the color and flavor, I'm going to continue to let this whip until it gets to stiff peaks, and I'm going to do that in the background, and I'm going to show you how to sift. Now when sifting, you're obviously going to want to use a sifter. A hand crank like mine works excellently, but any sifter will do. The reason we sift is to get all of the lumpy parts out of our dry ingredients so we get nice smooth tops. Now, we're going to sift this twice, and once that's done, I'm going to show you the next step. Dry ingredients are sifted, and now we're adding 1/3 of it into our meringue. And we're going to fold that in, and the reason why we only add 1/3 at first is because it makes everything easier to mix once we add the rest. Now, the folding technique I'm using is called a macaronage, and that's where we go around one full time, we cut in half, go around one full time, and repeat. Now, when everything is fully combined, we're going to do that around 50 times. After that's done, I'm going to show you some tests to see if the batter is ready. The 2 tests I like to use are known as the figure 8 test and the drop test. The figure 8 test is where you make a figure 8, and if you can make one, then it's ready. Then the drop test is where you drop a bit in, you count to 10, and if it's fully combined by 10, then it's ready. Now I'm going to show you how to pipe. You need a bag and a tip. My tip is around size 12, and I have a little connector that connects it to my reusable bag. That is not needed. All you technically need is a tip and a disposable bag. Now, to get the batter into the piping bag, I like to put mine in a tall cup and add the batter from there. It makes everything more stable and easier to do. Now I'm going to pipe. You're going to need either parchment paper or a silk pad. I use a silk pad because I have one that's reusable. Now you're going to pipe these out and you're going to let them rest for 30 minutes. Once the 30 minutes is over, if you're able to touch them and your hand comes off clean and they form a skin, they're ready. You're going to put them in the oven at 300 degrees and around 15 minutes. You're going to need to check on them once the 15 minutes is over because they may need more time. While those are developing a skin and baking, I'm going to be making my filling. I tend to use buttercream as I find that's easy and works well. For my buttercream, I'm making lime flavor to go with my pineapple shells. Some other alternatives to buttercream are jam, ganache, and even cream cheese if your cookies are savory. Now I'm going to make the frosting, and I'm going to pipe them and show you the completed cookies. I lost my footage, so here's my bunny. Now, my cookies were baked in 2 separate batches. One was baked for 15 minutes, and it turned out really yellow and really lovely. The other one was baked for closer to 18, and it got brown on top. So I'm going to show you those up close. Sorry for the lack of footage during this bit.
Hi, so as you can see, here's the real nice yellow ones. They're a little bit crumbly on the top, but that's because I didn't blend my almond flour. So that's the 15-minute one. Here's the one that was in for 18 minutes. As you can see, this one's a lot more brown, it's a lot more golden, and my camera's not focusing on it. Overall, it's got the same shape, the same texture, everything like that. It's just more golden on top. So that's that when it comes to kind of baking stuff. Just really, you have to keep an eye on these while they're baking. So I'm going to switch back and give you some tips and tricks. So in making macarons, the majority of mistakes tend to come from 3 separate parts. the baking, the meringue making, and the mixing / macaronaging. So I'm going to go over the mistakes that are made in those processes, and I'm going to give you ways you can prevent that. So firstly, I'm going to go over baking. When it comes to baking, the two decisive elements are the humidity of your environment and the temperature of your oven. Now, when it comes to the humidity of your environment, if your environment is way too humid, such as you live in a place like Florida, or it's a rainy day, that's going to prevent your cookies from forming shells. Now, shells are very important because that's what gives the kind of chewy inside, crunchy outside part of the macaron, but it also gives the feet of the macaron. Now, a way you can prevent humidity from affecting your cookies is by letting them form a shell in the oven and have the oven at a very low temperature so it can dry out the cookies without them getting humid and not forming a shell. Now let's get to the oven temperature. Oven temperature can affect a lot of things with your cookies. Specifically, if your oven temperature is too high, that can cause cracked tops, that can cause browned tops, and that can cause your cookies to be too dry and kind of just hard, and it's not going to be chewy on the inside. And of course, a way to fix that is to lower your oven temperature. But specifically, a way to fix brown tops is having a pan on the top rack of the oven. What that does specifically is it prevents the cookies from being too close to the heat source, and that's going to prevent browning. And that's another way you can fix brown bottoms is by moving your cookies up, because if your bottoms are brown, that means they're too close to a heat source. If your cookies are browning too much, you need to move them to a different spot in the oven. Now, another issue is cracked tops. Now, those are not going to be fixable. If your tops are cracking, the only way to fix that is to lower your oven temperature because it is too high. Of course, they're still going to be delicious, but you're not going to be able to fix them. Another thing is if your oven temperature is too low. If your oven temperature is too low, then your cookies are not going to cook properly. It's going to take forever, they're not going to rise properly, and just overall, it's not going to be very good. So now I'm going to get into the next topic, which is meringue. So when it comes to meringue, the major issue is a weak meringue, and that's something that interaction with oil causes, that pasteurized eggs causes, that's over or under mixing your meringue can cause. Now, a way to prevent this is to use cream tartar, but also aging your egg whites helps because aging the egg whites alters the proteins in the egg to kind of make a stiffer meringue, much like the cream tartar. It's kind of similar to the reason why we don't use pasteurized egg whites, because pasteurizing the egg whites chemically alters the proteins in the egg. Pasteurized eggs don't make a strong meringue at all, so don't buy cartons of egg whites that are pasteurized. Now, when it comes to having a wet meringue, another issue is putting food coloring and food flavoring. You really shouldn't be using that much food flavoring at all. For the most part, to be safe, if you have flavoring, you should put it in the frosting. But if you want flavoring in the shells, the best suggestion I have is to use powdered flavoring. That's going to get the best flavor with the lowest risk. And it's the same for color. The best color and the lowest risk is going to come from powdered items. But if you don't have powdered food coloring, then gel will work. Do not use liquid food coloring if you can. Overall, just avoid putting extra liquids into your meringue because that's going to make your batter wet. It's just going to cause issues. Speaking on the topic of batter, I'm going to move on to the issues with that now. If your batter is too wet, that's going to cause your feet not to form, your cookies won't rise as well, and that's going to cause a lot of issues with the general shape. Like, it's best to use powder because powder is not going to get your batter wet. Another issue is if your batter is too dry, that can possibly be caused by not having enough egg whites. If your batter is too dry, it's not going to mix very well together. It's just going to be hard to pipe and they're going to be misshapen. That's the major issues with baking meringues, and there's a lot more tips that I haven't mentioned. I will be putting links to recipes I like and give good advice, and I'll be putting that down in the description. Real quickly before I end this, I really just have to say thank you to everyone that helped me out. My mentor was amazing for this project. My parents are super kind for letting me use the kitchen and test things and figure everything out. And thank you to my teachers for being forgiving during this really hard time because COVID has kind of messed everything up with my senior project. So I thought, well, people are finding ways to communicate with their loved ones and tell them they love them without having to really see them. And baking was one, and I found that really important. So I thought I'd make a video on how to improve your baking, because really, what's a better gift to give than something that you've made? I hope you have a nice day. Thank you for watching.